Chapter 1. Success is not a game of chance. To get to the peak of your career, you need to be deliberate about your growth. Over the years, people have tried to discover the secrets behind exceptional talent. What made Mozart or Leonardo da Vinci so great? How come some people are better at playing chess than others? And many times, in a bid to answer these questions, it's easier just to say that genes are responsible for their achievements. Yes, in some cases, genetic endowment makes a difference, particularly in areas where height or other physical factors are essential. But the brain is adaptable, and training can create skills that did not exist before. So learning now becomes a way of creating abilities. It isn't just a way of reaching one's potential, but rather a way of developing it. The right sort of practice carried out over a significant period leads to improvement. This summary describes in detail what that right sort of practice is and how it can be put to work. The information on this sort of practice is drawn from a relatively new area of psychology that can be best described as the science of expertise. Deliberate practice was developed specifically to help people become among the best in the world at what they do, and not merely to become good enough. It is the most powerful approach to learning that has yet been discovered. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. More than 2 decades ago, after studying expert performers from a wide range of fields, Ericsson and his colleagues realized that no matter what the field, the most effective approaches to improving performance all follow a single set of general principles. This universal approach is known as deliberate practice. Today, deliberate practice remains the standard for anyone in any field who wishes to take advantage of the gift of adaptability to build new skills and abilities. So, if you are interested in becoming better in anything you do, and looking to improve your life generally, this is your manual to a better experience. Keep reading to find out how you can be the best in your field and achieve your goals. Chapter 2. Purposeful practice is powerful. Chapter 3. The human brain is capable of many things, but you need to be open to learning so you can. Chapter 2. Purposeful practice is powerful enough to keep you focused on your goals until you achieve them. In the late 1970s, Ericsson conducted an experiment with Steve Falloon, an undergraduate at Carnegie Mellon University. It involved memorizing strings of numbers. In the early sessions, he could only remember 7 or 8 digits, but the goal was to see how much Falloon could improve with practice. By the 60th session with Falloon, he was able to remember 20 digits, and after about 200 sessions, he had reached 82 digits. Previous psychological evidence predicted that remembering 7 or 8 digits was normal. This was because decades of research show that there's a strict limit to the number of items that a person can retain in short-term memory, which is the memory the brain uses to hold on to small amounts of information for a brief period. But the long-term memory does not have the same limitations. Given enough time to work on it, you can memorize dozens of numbers. The world is full of people with extraordinary abilities that history formerly deemed impossible. But while the abilities are extraordinary, they are as a result of consistent practice. The second half of the 20th century experienced a steady increase in the amount of time that people in different areas devoted to training, combined with a growing sophistication of training techniques. This increase resulted in a steady improvement in the abilities of the performers in various fields. If you never push yourself beyond your comfort zone, you will never improve. But many people learn a skill by starting with a general idea of what they want, getting some instruction from a teacher or a book, and practicing until they get to an acceptable level, and then let it be automatic and stop improving. This is why people believe that if you have been doing something for a long time, you are automatically better at it than someone else. But research shows otherwise. Once a person reaches that level of acceptable performance and automaticity, the additional years of practice do not lead to improvement. If you are not satisfied with this automated level of performance, you need to start purposeful practice. Purposeful practice is a much more thoughtful and focused type of practice. It has specific and well-defined goals. It is also focused on a particular task and keeps you on track. It is more effective than the usual just enough method, and it is a step toward deliberate practice, which is our ultimate goal. Chapter 3. The human brain is capable of many things, but you need to be open to learning so you can find them. When you take on mental challenges, there's no easy way to observe the resulting changes in your brain as it adapts to new demands. And because you can't see any changes in your brain, it is easy to assume that there isn't much going on. The structure and function of the brain change in response to various sorts of mental training. An in-depth study of New York taxi drivers by Eleanor Maguire, a neuroscientist at the University College London, showed that the posterior part of the hippocampus, the part of the brain involved in the development of memories, was larger in taxi drivers than in the other participants in the study. Another study showed that taxi drivers' posterior hippocampi were significantly larger than those of the bus drivers. The implication of these studies showed that the difference in size was not related to driving itself, but to the navigational skills that the job required. Bus drivers repeated the same routes daily, but taxi drivers always tried different routes. Maguire's study, finally published in 2011, provides evidence that the human brain grows and changes in response to intense training. The fact that the human brain and body respond to challenges by developing new abilities underlies the effectiveness of purposeful and deliberate practice. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. Whenever you engage in some sort of vigorous physical activity, the body adjusts to accommodate those changes. Recent studies show that learning a new skill is much more effective at triggering structural changes in the brain than simply continuing to practice a skill you have already learned. On the other hand, pushing too hard for too long can lead to burnout and ineffective learning. The key difference between the traditional approach to learning and the purposeful practice or deliberate practice approach is that the traditional approach is not designed to challenge changes, but deliberate practice prepares you for any challenges that you may encounter. Chapter 4. The quality of your mental preparations determine how vast your knowledge will be. Keep improving. Human beings use mental representations every day. A mental representation is a mental structure that corresponds to an object, idea, a collection of information, or anything else, concrete or abstract, that the brain is thinking about. A simple example is a visual image. Mona Lisa, for example, when mentioned, causes people to conjure an image of the painting in their minds. This image is their mental representation of the Mona Lisa. Much of the deliberate practice involves developing more efficient mental representations that you can use in whatever activity you practice. When Falloon was training to improve his ability to remember long strings of digits, he created mental representations. When London taxi drivers learn to navigate efficiently from point A to every point B in the city, they do it by developing increasingly sophisticated maps of the city, mental representations. The best way to develop a mental representation of mental representations is to spend a little time getting to know them. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. In essence, these representations are pre-existing patterns of information, facts, images, rules, relationships, that are held in long-term memory, and that can be used to respond quickly and effectively in certain types of situations. The thing all mental representations have in common is that they make it possible to quickly process large amounts of information, despite the limitations of short-term memory. The more you study a subject, the more detailed your mental representations of it become, and the better you get at assimilating new information. What sets expert performers apart from everyone else is the quality and quantity of their mental representations. Through years of practice, they develop highly complex and sophisticated representations of the various situations they are likely to encounter in their fields, such as the vast number of arrangements of chess pieces that can appear during games. These representations allow them to make faster, more accurate decisions and respond more quickly and effectively in a given situation. This, more than anything else, explains the difference in performance between novices and experts. The relationship between skill and mental representations is a virtuous circle. The more skilled you become, the better your mental representations are. The better your mental representations are, the more effectively you can practice your skills. Chapter 5. Consistent, deliberate practice makes the difference between experts and other people. At the Max Planck Institute, Ericsson recruited two collaborators, Ralph Kramp, a graduate student at the Institute, and Clemens Tesch-Romer, a postdoctoral fellow there. And together, they tried to understand what separated the truly outstanding student violinist from those who were merely good. The traditional view held that differences among individuals performing at these highest levels would be due primarily to innate talent. This is the basic blueprint for getting better in any pursuit. Get as close to deliberate practice as you can. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. Everyone from the very top students to the future music teachers agreed. Improvement was hard, and they didn't enjoy the work they did to improve. In short, there were no students who just loved to practice and thus needed less motivation than the others. These students were motivated to practice intensely and with full concentration because they saw such practice as essential to improving their performance. If you find that something works, keep doing it. If it doesn't work, stop. The other crucial finding was that there was only one major difference among the three groups. This was the total number of hours that the students had devoted to solitary practice. They found that the best violin students had, on average, spent significantly more time than the other violin students had spent. This research shows that nobody develops extraordinary abilities without putting in tremendous amounts of practice. No matter which area you study, you will find that the top performers have devoted a tremendous amount of time to develop their abilities. Deliberate practice is different from other sorts of purposeful practice in a few important ways. It requires a field that is already reasonably well developed. That is, a field where the best performers have attained a level of performance that sets them apart from people who are just entering the field. Deliberate practice involves well-defined, specific goals, and often involves improving some aspect of the target performance. Deliberate practice requires a person's full attention and conscious actions. Deliberate practice involves feedback and modification of efforts in response to that feedback. If you're in a field where deliberate practice is an option, you should take that option. If not, apply the principles of deliberate practice as much as possible. In practice, this often boils down to purposeful practice with a few extra steps. First, identify the expert performers. Figure out what they do that makes them so good, and then come up with training techniques that allow you to do it too. Chapter 6. The 10,000-hour rule is not necessarily valid. To develop your skills, you need to always practice. In Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, he recommends that to become an expert at something, you need to put in 10,000 hours of training. Over time, many people have stuck by this rule. Unfortunately, this rule is wrong in several ways. There's nothing magical about 10,000 hours. Many people have interpreted it as a promise that almost anyone can become an expert in a given field by putting in 10,000 hours of practice. Becoming accomplished in any field in which there is a well-established history of people working to become experts requires a tremendous amount of effort exerted over many years. It may not require exactly 10,000 hours, but it will take a lot. Anders Ericsson and Robert Loop. If you practice something for a few hundred hours, you will almost certainly see a significant improvement, but you have only scratched the surface. You can keep getting better. How much you improve is up to you. The reason that you must put in 10,000 or more hours of practice to become one of the best is that the people you are competing with have themselves put in 10,000 or more hours of practice. There is no point at which performance maxes out and additional practice does not lead to further improvement. In any area of human endeavor, people have a tremendous capacity to improve their performance as long as they train in the right way. As training techniques are improved and new heights of achievement are discovered, people in every area of human endeavor are continually finding ways to get better, raising the bar on what was thought to be possible. There's no sign that this will stop. The horizons of human potential are expanding with each new generation. Did you know Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart could identify any note played on a musical instrument, even when he was in a different room? Chapter 7. It's easy to get busy that you have no time to learn new things. Find a way to infuse learning into your work. The first step toward enhancing performance in an organization is realizing that improvement is possible only if participants abandon regular practices. Doing so requires recognizing and rejecting three prevailing myths. The first is the belief that your genetically prescribed characteristics limit your abilities. But the right sort of practice can help anyone improve in just about any area they choose to focus on. If you follow the principles of deliberate practice, you can develop ways to identify the top performers in a field and train other lesser performers and bring them up closer to that top level. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. The second myth holds that if you do something for long enough, you're bound to get better at it. Doing the same thing over and over again in exactly the same way is not a recipe for improvement. It is a recipe for stagnation and gradual decline. The third myth states that all it takes to improve is effort. If you just try hard enough, you'll get better. The reality is, unless you are using practice techniques specifically designed to improve some particular skills, trying hard will not get you very far. The deliberate practice mindset offers a very different view. Anyone can improve, but it requires the right approach. If you are not improving, it's not because you lack innate talent. You're not practicing the right way. Once you understand this, improvement becomes a matter of figuring out the right way. The approach acknowledges that business people are so busy that they hardly have any time to practice their skills. So it is best to come up with ways that normal business activities could be turned into opportunities for purposeful or deliberate practice. One benefit of learning while real work gets done is that it gets people into the habit of practicing and thinking about practicing. Once they understand the importance of regular practice and realize just how much they can improve by using it, they look for opportunities throughout the day in which normal business activities can be transformed into practice activities. Eventually, practice becomes just a normal part of the business day. If it works as intended, the result is an entirely different mindset from the usual one in which the business day is for work. Chapter 8. Teachers serve as an essential part of your growth. Deliberate practice is for all those who want to control their lives and create their potential. The first step to ensuring deliberate practice is to find a good teacher. Given the expense of private instruction, people often try to make do with group lessons or even YouTube videos or books, and those approaches will generally work to some degree. But no matter how many times you watch a demonstration in class or on YouTube, you're still going to miss out on some information, and you're not going to be able to figure out the best way to fix all your weaknesses, even if you do spot them. The most motivated and intelligent student will advance more quickly under the tutelage of someone who knows the best order in which to learn things. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. When you're practicing by yourself, you have to rely upon your mental representations to monitor your performance and determine what you might be doing wrong. This is not impossible, but is much more difficult and less efficient than having an experienced teacher watching you and providing feedback. Another essential element of deliberate practice that benefits from the right sort of one-on-one instruction is engagement. If you want to improve in chess, you don't do it by playing chess. You do it with a separate study of the Grandmaster's games. You need to remember that if your mind is wandering or relaxed and just having fun, you probably won't improve. American swimmer Natalie Coughlin once described her version of this discovery. Over her career, she won a total of 12 Olympic medals. While she was always an excellent swimmer, she didn't become great until she learned to focus throughout her practice. If, for some reason, you cannot get a teacher, it is still possible to improve if you keep in mind 3 F's: focus, feedback, fix it. Break the skill down into components that you can repeatedly do and analyze effectively. Determine your weaknesses and figure out ways to address them. Pay attention to what happens when you practice. If you are not improving, you might need to try something else. Chapter 9. Motivation is what helps you through the difficult moments and keeps you focused on your daily tasks. Purposeful practice is hard work. It's hard to keep going, and even if you keep up your training, it's hard to maintain focus and effort. So you may eventually stop pushing yourself and stop improving. Despite the effort that it takes, it certainly is possible to keep going. Every successful person is living proof that it can be done. That people can practice hard, day after day, week after week, for years on end. These people have all figured out how to make deliberate practice an ongoing part of their lives. Successful mental representations are inextricably tied to actions, not just thoughts, and it is the extended practice aimed at reproducing the original product that will produce the mental representations we seek. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. It may seem natural to assume that these people who maintain intense practice schedules for years have some rare gift of willpower that others just lack. But that would be a mistake for 2 very compelling reasons. First, there is little scientific evidence for the existence of a general willpower. What helps, for sure, is motivation. Motivation is quite different from willpower. One of the most effective ways to stay motivated is to set aside a fixed time to practice that has been cleared of all other obligations and distractions. Proper planning can help you avoid many of the things that might lead you to spend less time on practice than you wanted. More generally, look for anything that might interfere with your training and find ways to minimize its influence. Expert performers do 2 things that can help. The first is general physical maintenance, getting enough sleep and staying healthy. Another critical motivational factor in deliberate practice is a belief that you can succeed. To push yourself when you don't feel like it, you must believe that you can improve and rank among the best. One of the strongest forms of extrinsic motivation is social motivation. This can take several forms. One of the simplest and most direct is the approval and admiration of others. One of the best ways to create and sustain social motivation is to surround yourself with supportive people. Deliberate practice can be a lonely pursuit, but if you have a group of friends in the same positions, you have a built-in support system. These people understand the effort you're putting into your practice. They can share training tips with you, appreciate your victories, and commiserate with you over your difficulties. Chapter 10. The journey to becoming an expert begins from childhood. Every child can be a genius if taught in the right way. In the early 1980s, psychologist Benjamin Bloom directed a project at the University of Chicago that dug into experts' childhoods. He tried to find out how they, among all people, develop such extraordinary abilities. The researchers working with Bloom chose 120 experts in 6 fields: concert pianists, Olympic swimmers, tennis champions, research mathematicians, research neurologists, and sculptors, and looked for common factors in their development. They found that once a future expert performer becomes interested and shows some promise in an area, the typical next step is to take lessons from a coach or teacher. While there are various ways that parents and teachers can motivate children, the motivation must ultimately be something that comes from within the child, or else it won't endure. Many children will find some initial motivation to explore or to try something because of their natural curiosity or playfulness, and parents have an opportunity to use this initial interest as a springboard to an activity. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. Generally, when they're in their early or mid-teens, future experts make a major commitment to become the best that they can be. During this stage, the motivation lies solely with the student, but the family may still play an important support role. In Bloom's study, all 120 experts had begun their climb toward that pinnacle as children, which is typical among expert performers. Expertise in some fields is unattainable for anyone who doesn't start training as a child. The most obvious performance issues are those that involve physical abilities. In the general population, physical performance peaks around age 20. In addition to the gradual deterioration in physical abilities that accompanies aging, some physical skills simply cannot be developed to expert levels if one doesn't start working on them in childhood. The human body is growing and developing through adolescence up to the late teens or early 20s. As you get older, your skeletal structure is mostly set, which has implications for certain abilities. Research on the most successful creative people in various fields, particularly science, finds that creativity goes hand in hand with working hard and maintaining focus over long periods. For example, a study of Nobel Prize winners found that they had generally published scientific papers earlier than most of their peers, and published significantly more papers throughout their careers than others in their discipline. In other words, they worked harder than everyone else. Chapter 11. Anyone can be whatever they choose to be because talent doesn't determine a person's abilities. Extraordinary abilities are the product of much practice and training. Various researchers have studied this issue, and there is no evidence that large numbers of people are born without the innate ability to sing. There are some cultures, such as the Anang Ibibio of Nigeria, where everyone is expected to sing, everyone is taught to sing, and everyone can sing. But generally, the reason that most non-singers can't sing is because they haven't properly learned it. You do not stop learning and improving because you have reached some innate limits on your performance. You stop learning and growing because you stopped practicing or never started. When people assume that talent plays a significant, even determining role in how accomplished a person can become, that assumption points one towards certain decisions and actions. If you assume that people who are not innately gifted are never going to be good at something, then the children who don't excel at something right away are encouraged to try something else. And the predictions come true. The girl who was told to forget about sports never becomes any good at hitting a tennis ball. The prophecy becomes self-fulfilling. On the flip side, the children who get more attention and praise from their teachers and more support and encouragement from their parents do end up developing their abilities to a much higher degree than those who were told never to try. There is no evidence that any otherwise normal people are born without the innate talent to sing or do math or perform any other skill. This is the dark side of believing in innate talent. It can beget a tendency to assume that some people have a talent for something and others don't, and that you can tell the difference early on. The best way to avoid this is to recognize the potential in all of us and find ways to develop it. Chapter 12. The future of learning begins with every step that the world takes today. 3 researchers associated with the University of British Columbia, Louis Deslauriers, Ellen Shulu, and Carl Wyman, suggest that by modifying traditional teaching approaches to reflect the insights of deliberate practice, it is possible to improve the effectiveness of teaching in various fields. It makes sense that if genes do play a role, Their role would play out through shaping how likely a person is to engage in deliberate practice, or how effective that practice is likely to be. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. In almost any area of education, the most useful learning objectives will be those that help students develop effective mental representations. In physics, for example, it is always possible to teach students how to solve particular equations and decide which equations should be applied in which situations. But that's not the most important part of what physicists know. Research shows that while the students may sometimes be almost as good as the experts at solving quantitative problems, the students are far behind the experts in their ability to solve qualitative problems, or issues that involve concepts but no numbers. Good mental representations. One benefit that a young student gets from developing mental representations is the freedom to begin exploring that skill on his or her own. Students who develop mental representations can go on to generate their scientific experiments or to write their books. The best way to help students develop their skills in mental representations in an area is to give them models they can replicate and learn from. They need to try and fail, but with ready access to models that show what success looks like. Having students create mental representations in one area helps them understand exactly what it takes to be successful, not only in that area but also in others. Most people have never attained a level of performance in any field that is sufficient to show them the true power of mental representations to plan, execute, and evaluate their performance in the way that expert performers do. And thus, they never really understand what it takes to reach this level. Once they understand what is necessary to get there in one area, they know, at least in principle, what it takes in other areas. Conclusion. Revolution starts when you realize that the best people in various areas do not occupy that position because they were born with some innate talent, but rather because they have developed their abilities through years of practice. But that realization is not enough. Everyone needs to give other people the tools they need to harness that adaptability and control their potential. Spreading the word about deliberate practice is part of that. Over time, then, by learning more about what goes into expert performance in various fields, and by creating a generation of students primed to take advantage of that, the world can become better. Most people understand deliberate practice and use it to enrich their lives and their children's. We, unlike any other animal, can consciously change ourselves to improve ourselves in ways we choose. This distinguishes us from every other species alive today, and as far as we know, from every other species that has ever lived. Anders Ericsson and Robert Poole. In the future, most people will have no choice but to learn new skills continuously, so it will be essential to train students and adults about how to learn efficiently. With the technological revolution, there are new opportunities to make teaching more effective. For example, it is possible to videotape real-world experiences of experts and create libraries and learning centers where students could be trained in such a way that avoids having to learn on the job and risk the welfare of patients, students, and clients. For adults who are already in the work world, there is a need to develop better training techniques based on deliberate practice principles. These techniques must also be aimed at creating more effective mental representations that will not only help them improve the skills they use in their current jobs, but that will enable them to develop new skills for new jobs. The most valuable gifts you can give your children are the confidence in their ability to remake themselves again and again and the tools to do that job. They will need to see firsthand that they control their abilities and are not held hostage by some antiquated idea of natural talent. And they will need to be given the knowledge and support to improve themselves in whatever ways they choose. Try this. Find a coach in your field that you can learn from and reach out to them asking them to assist you. Also, be more observant around your children and praise them as often as is necessary.